Los Angeles is one of the most dynamic economies in the world. It has the largest international trade industry in the United States, and it's home to the busiest container port in North America. But now the economic growth in California and in much of the world is expected to come to an abrupt end because of the coronavirus.
You mentioned earlier weaponizing trade, and you wouldn't think anyone would want to weaponize the coronavirus, but there are reports that hardliners in the administration, Peter Navarro for one, see this as an opportunity to have medicine and medical supplies made here in the United States and no longer rely on China. Just on a personal level, I mean, that someone would take this horrendous virus that's killing people and use it as an advantage, just that piece of it alone. But then from the other standpoint of relationships, talk to me about both and your take on that.
Yeah, I think it's disappointing that there are discussions about weaponizing kind of such devastation that's happening around the world. I think what we should really be focused on is how do we work with the world and with our global partners to resolve these issues so this doesn't happen again. We saw that in SARS back in 2002, 2003, and the devastation it had on Hong Kong and the regional economy there. And I think those are lessons that to be learned, and of course in Africa with Ebola. And I think this is a really good opportunity for the United States as a global leader to work with the world to look at solutions, not to take advantage of the opportunity to talk about manufacturing. I do think that we should diversify our supply chain to make sure that in case there is an emergency that we're not dependent on one manufacturer or one manufacturing country. I think these are lessons to be learned. However, to take advantage of such a devastating event for business opportunity, it's a bit disappointing to hear. And what I'm hoping is that more and more of those who are working on the leadership level and political level will start talking about how do we work more collaboratively together so that we can avoid future situations like this, because we know as the globe is getting smaller and smaller and getting more and more interconnected, these events will happen over and over again. And at a certain point it's going to happen to China, at a certain point it's going to happen to the United States as well. At that point we want to be able to look at our partners for them to reach their hands out to help us as well.
Stephen is the Executive Vice President of Los Angeles Economic Development Corporation and the President of World Trade Center Los Angeles. He's led international trade missions to China, Mexico, and Korea. He was born in Hong Kong and grew up in Los Angeles. Stephen received both his bachelor and master's degrees from the University of California, Los Angeles.
Stephen, I was just looking, Moody's estimates 300,000 U.S. jobs are lost because of the trade war. Economists describe this as a dangerous game of economic chicken. You and I were at a conference last year and we talked about this, and you clearly see the fallout from all of this. Give me your take on it.
Well, I think unfortunately trade and trade policies have been weaponized by countries, utilizing it as negotiation tactics to really try to leverage each other on other issues. And what we're not paying attention to is the impact of trade on the local economies and what it means for the individuals that are actually having to deal with the aftermath. So from a subnational perspective, business and trade is going to be business and trade. We're going to need each other around the world. The fact is trade and globalization has happened. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's already moved way past that. So at this point, what we're hoping is that the international and national leaders will hear the local community's concerns and really resolve some of these issues to help us get back to business.
What we're doing right now is dialogue.
Yes.
I mean, that's a big part of your life. And you know, when you look at dialogue between our two countries, there's always been dialogue going back and forth. But I was just looking today, with the exception of trade negotiators and the U.S. ambassador, there isn't a senior level U.S. official below the president with any kind of relationship with the Chinese.
Yeah.
Talk to me about why that's a big, big problem.
Well, it's a shame that we don't have that relationship now. But don't forget, over the last 40 years, actually even more than that, we've spent numerous political capital as well as actual resources to develop that strong relationship with China and with our partners from around the world, because we see that diplomacy and relationship and dialogues actually leads to good business practice and economic prosperity for all regions. So not to have that direct relationship and that dialogue, and not only the immediate relationship, but it's really all about long-term relationship and trust. Because what we see is that when you have that trust and you have that long-term partnership, it's easier for you to resolve some of the differences that will arise. Look, it's international disputes often will happen just based on various issues that are happening. The most important part is how do we get to the resolution? So not having those individuals in place to be able to have those dialogues and to be able to trust each other and be able to call on each other and say, you know what, remember 15 years ago when I did you that favor? You know, I'm calling in the favor now. We would like to really work with you to just have a conversation to make sure that we don't have collateral damage all the way across because of this small, short-sighted fight that we have. Those are the things that we need the most, and we're hoping that our leadership will get back to the negotiation table and start talking to our international partners. That's so important to us.
You made a joke before we started taping. You wish the year was already over. We're very early in the year. So here's somebody who can actually kind of track the trajectory of this relationship, because you've been watching this and involved for some time. Yeah. So walk us through it. I mean, when did you start to see the deterioration? Just how bad is it today? And how do you kind of stitch it all back together again?
Well, I think with any relationship, there are going to be ups and downs. And I think we've gone through a period of escalating partnership, especially after 2008 during the recession for the United States. What we saw is that a lot of Chinese investments start coming into the United States, especially in the West Coast, in California. There was a study that was done by the Rhodium Group that documented in 2016, we had about $16 billion in investment from China alone into California. And of course, San Francisco and Los Angeles region got the major share of that. And within 2 years, in 2018, the same study and the survey revealed that only $330 million were invested here in California by China. From $16 billion to $330 million in 2 years. That's a significant change. And for us, we were able to benefit from all the investment that was coming in from a construction perspective, from tourism perspective, and all of a sudden to see that decrease, we've been tracking that. And so the deterioration really started to happen about 3 years ago. The relationship started getting a bit more tense, but it wasn't until the Chinese government issued the capital flow restriction that we actually saw a drastic decrease in the amount invested here. That's also contributed, of course, by the trade tension and trade war with China. And a lot of Chinese companies just didn't know what the future looked like for them if they continue to invest here. So that trend has been continuing, and we're seeing the effect here in Los Angeles. And we're hoping that there's going to be a bit of a positive upward trend after the Chinese New Year's because of China trade agreement that was reached between President Trump and President Xi. But unfortunately, the coronavirus outbreak happened around the same time. So now we're dealing with a whole different set of issues.
While the ongoing coronavirus pandemic impacts all sectors of the economy, economists believe there are several reasons California could be extremely vulnerable. It has a large concentration of Pacific Rim trade. It depends on travel and tourism and the related leisure and hospitality businesses. And the information technology sector also relies heavily on trade. The United Nations says around the globe, businesses will likely cut their overseas investments by between 5 and 15% this year in response to the coronavirus outbreak.
Those numbers equate to lives and livelihood. Yes. And businesses, and there are people hurting because of all of this. Yeah. Give me a sense of how when you take away all the numbers, how does this impact people here in the Southland?
Yeah. Well, in the Los Angeles region, there are 18.7 million people that live in this region. And the reason why our economy is so prosperous over the last decade or so has been the fact that we have a lot of different diverse investment opportunities and also different industry sectors that are growing. And a lot of that is contributed by the foreign investments and foreign partnership that we've had over the years, that we've developed over the last 40 years. And when you see a drastic decrease from certain regions of the investment that's coming over here, that stops the flow of capital for us to be able to fund and finance some of these major projects. So for example, if you look around downtown Los Angeles over the last decade, you see a renaissance and a transformation of our skyline that we haven't seen in decades. And a lot of it is funded by Chinese and Asian investments. From the tallest building west of the Mississippi now is the Intercontinental Hotel, the Wilshire Grand Hotel, funded by Korean Air, to Shanghai Greenland and Beijing Oceanwide. All these investments are coming in, really transforming how we're going to be able to prepare for mega events that are going to be happening in Los Angeles in the future, sporting events that will be utilizing our hotels. But once we stop those investments coming from Asia, and specifically coming from China, we're not seeing these new hotel development projects that are coming in the rate that it should be. And without those hotel development projects, we cannot accommodate for major conferences and major sporting events, because when you have millions of people coming to Los Angeles, where are they going to stay? If they have to basically drive all over Los Angeles in order to find a hotel, that's not very convenient for them. So that turns us away from being the global destination for tourism that we should be. So these are the direct impact, because when we don't have those conventions coming in, we don't have the tourism dollars. When the tourists are not coming in, our local mom and pop shops, the restaurants, the shops that they're selling local products are not able to thrive. So these are direct impact on the local community, and we're very, very concerned.
I met with Stephen before the coronavirus had exploded into a pandemic. 3 weeks later, the entire state of California was on a full lockdown. But even before then, the economic impact of the virus was at the top of Stephen's mind.
So Stephen, describe what the last couple of days have been like for you, given the coronavirus.
A lot of companies do not know how to prepare for this. Also, we have to work with the local government and also the state government to talk about what the recovery plans are going to be. How do you deal with unemployment issues? So these are a lot of different things that people are talking about.
In January of 2020, people were also talking about the Phase 1 trade deal struck between Washington and Beijing. It came after 2 years of intense trade talks. In it, China committed to buying $200 billion of U.S. goods and services over the next 2 years.
You were on a panel discussion that I moderated here in Southern California. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting that you said was, and this was in the heart of the trade war, that you don't turn the spigot off instantly, and once it's turned back on, it doesn't come shooting out. I mean, it trickles back out. So even when you see this trade war kind of relaxing, we've got a deal, Phase 1 deal done, you're not seeing all that money pouring back in, are you?
No, I think people are very cautious, because to know that a spigot can be turned off and there are going to be restrictions that are applied, and just because there's a Phase 1 of the trade agreement, all the details are not hammered out. So we're not quite sure how Chinese investors are going to be treated here and how U.S. investors are going to be treated in China. So until you have proven relationship and proven track record that you can trust each other, then they're going to be caution when investors are going to start re-entering the markets. They might not bring in the billion-dollar projects. They might bring in maybe $100 million, $200 million to test out the viability of those projects, which is still great, but you're just not seeing the same impact that we had. And the reason why we're able to get to those billion-dollar mark is because we've developed those trusting relationships that they know there's a path forward for them to be successful in our markets.
While we're out here in California, we were at Karma Automotive, and, you talked to some of the guys who were working there in the plant, and they said there just weren't any manufacturing jobs. Mm-hmm. And not only that this is more craftsmanship, and they really embrace the fact that here's Chinese direct investment, it's really helping their lives. Mm-hmm. International Vitamin Corporation, which is in Orange County, I went down there. Again, manufacturing, and this is one of the things that Donald Trump's talked about, bringing back manufacturing jobs. Ironically, these are Chinese companies doing so. You think about how they came, they invested, and now that caution you're talking about, yes. Because one of the things that Chinese investors, they like stability, they don't like chaos. What you get with the Trump administration is chaos. How do you entice them?
Well, we have to talk about the subnational aspect. We have to talk about the relationship that they've built with Los Angeles and California over the years. And although there might be regulation from a federal level that might be chaotic, and there might be messaging from the national level or other states that might be a bit negative, in California, Los Angeles, we've never changed our tune. for the last 4 decades and beyond, we've always said that Los Angeles is open for business, and we're very welcoming of international communities around the world to invest here because we're leading by example. This region is not only tolerant and accepting of immigrants and people from around the world. We are from around the world. We are people from around the world. And from a very personal perspective, as an immigrant from Hong Kong, moving over here and to be accepted by the community here and to be able to sit in this chair and be in this position as the president of the World Trade Center Los Angeles to represent Los Angeles across the globe. It's very rare that you see this in many other countries. You don't see many Asians sitting representing an African nation or a major city in Africa or in Europe. It's only here in the United States, especially in Los Angeles, where we're able to do that. So that's why this relationship was so important to us, and we've spent a lot of time and effort to develop this relationship. And so what we're trying to tell our international partners is that even though there might be some fluctuation that's happening on a national level, from a domestic, local level, that has not changed. We continue to be partners with them, and we want them to feel safe when they're here.
Unfortunately, we have to stop this conversation. We run out of time, but what a delight. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.